Bitcoin Cash is perhaps the only blockchain in the world that upgrades using an emergent pre-consensus system known as the chip process. During the most recent Bitcoin Cash network discussion, we talked about what the chip process is, why it is so important, and how it came to be. To start, Imaginary Username and John Neary talk a bit about the history of how upgrades were supposed to have worked and how they actually worked in the past.
In the very beginning, Bitcoin was just a piece of software that's written by Satoshi, and then Satoshi says whatever he wants in that software, and then it gets implemented. That was at the very beginning. And then Satoshi disappeared, and then Bitcoin became decentralized. But while Satoshi left, people would argue that he left some clues in terms of how to perform an agreed upon upgrade. But there was the block size debate, which resulted in the birth of BCH itself. And then BCH itself went through a couple of different upgrades. And then there were some more chaotic ones where there were great controversies. So the fundamental question there is that in a cryptocurrency network, there can only be one set of consensus rules at a time. And so deciding how to upgrade is then a crucially important thing.
We found just empirically from history that if you try to leave all of this to miners, what really happens, like at the day of the split, let the miners decide on the day of the split. The reality is that the split has already happened by that point, right? There's so much that goes on leading up to a hard fork or an upgrade or a soft fork or whatever. Like whatever leading up to an upgrade, the split has already happened. So this process is very important that people get involved and there's a shared understanding of what needs to happen and what should happen.
Next, Bitcoin Cash has had some unfortunate setbacks due to splits in the past. The previous process was clearly lacking. An alternative was needed.
What happened at the beginning of this specific chip process was that we were in the aftermath of revolution against a certain guy who wanted to implement a tax on the distribution. And that guy was eventually kicked out. So we recognize that, okay, we know what we don't want. First, we don't want a centralized body to just say by, decree, we want this and this should go on at a time of my choosing. BCH is also not at a point yet where we can just follow BTC's footstep and say, you know what, we are never hard forking again. So this is where the chip process was born. In that we emphasize that there should be an orderly process. That is why the chip process follows a relatively clear yearly schedule. We also spell out that all this process should take place in the open, as it is transparent and follows an orderly schedule. What we hope to see that, whether a proposal is included should become clearer and clearer as the process goes on.
Now that we've learned a bit of history, how does the chip process actually work? Jonathan walks us through starting a chip for a theoretical 2 terabyte block upgrade.
Right, so there are no strict rules or limits for how you do this. Any social media channel will actually work as a starting point. But if you look at what organizations and companies are usually getting impacted and therefore important to reach out to early, they are concentrated around a handful of more Bitcoin Cash-oriented channels. Bitcoin Cash Research is the forum that's usually the best starting point. But if you happen to have connections and know people in the space, then reaching out to those directly will probably be just as good a starting point to get that early feedback so that you can get something published. So if you want to have 2 terabyte blocks, you'll first start by figuring out what's going to happen if you get 2 terabyte blocks. And when you have a pretty good idea of what that outcome is going to be, you can start documenting it. You can write up a document that tells people I think we should do this. And if we do this, I expect that to happen. That shows that you've not just come up with an idea, but you've actually considered a bit about what the implications of your idea is. The next step is to make sure that your idea is known. You should try to be in the public and the open as much as you can when you have discussions about this, but that is not going to be enough, because most people who work on developing things or who are building businesses, they don't have time to go dig in the open for people's ideas. When you have had some discussion and you have a good idea of what things is and you still think it's a good thing to do, then you start need to go out and figure out who is actually going to get impacted by this. Like, which are the specific companies that are going to either be forced to make some changes, upgrade some code, or who will benefit from this. When you know who those are, you need to compile that as part of your document and tell people that, I've identified these stakeholders. Are there any more stakeholders? Have I missed anyone? Try to cooperate with people in the ecosystem to figure out what is the actual scope. Not what you think the scope is, what is the actual scope. And then you'll have to do the very, very time-consuming work of trying to reach out to every single one of your stakeholders and give them a short explanation and reference the material and ask if they can take some time to give you some feedback. You also need to be very clear on what your goal is. You need to have an idea that is so specific that people kind of are forced to take a decision on it. For example, you could set a timeline on it. You could say that I want to have it for the next upgrade. Because if you don't have that timeline, if it's just open, people think okay, so he just wants to evaluate an idea. Okay, he can do that evaluation, I'll come in later. But if you have a clear timeline and you start telling people that I've actually passed this through company A, B, and C, and I talked with developer team A, B, and C, these people think that of it, those people think that of it, and it's generally a positive perspective, then more and more of the people who are normally busy and who wouldn't talk with you because they are busy are going to give you time, because you have shown that you're able to do that legwork and actually get connected with people. This is a matter of awareness and building consensus. The goal of the SHIP process is not actually the technical side, but it's the social side. And it's really important, because if you don't have awareness, then there is going to be people with different opinions who are going to be in conflict with you, and they will not know about what's going on. And when it gets sprung on them and they are discovering it late in the process, when people have already kind of settled down and chosen their path, the tone of the discussion becomes very negative. People are like, why didn't you tell me earlier? And I have lots of reasons why not to do this, but it's too late now, so no one's going to listen to me, and they feel unheard. It's really important that you have a clear timeline, to have a long-term perspective, and that you're spending a significant amount of your time actually talking with people. Identifying the stakeholders can be one of the most difficult tasks in this.
John also told us a bit about how stability affects every aspect of the network, from users to investors to developers.
The idea that you have the process there and people understand that it's there, and if you follow it, then you can generally, find out, you can discover if your idea is actually a good one or if it just sounds good. And just because you have a loud voice, it doesn't mean that the upgrade is definitely going to happen. Or just because you're in control of a certain node software, it doesn't mean that it's going to happen. And so once you get to that point, then the stability emerges from that, right? Where there is a shared understanding that things need to happen before anything gets taken seriously. And once you get to that stability, then a company like ours, like General Protocols, can say, okay, BCH is a stable network. It's not going to break things. They have things together, and upgrades are going to happen, but it's also going to be stable. I can probably build some business or some products on top of this. And if you don't have that, then it's just going to drive people away because they don't know what to expect. And then traders, of course, if you're a trader and you're dealing with, speculating on the value of it, splits are just that's just it's very destructive to the value of the network effect and so forth.
The chip process welcomes and encourages everyone to participate in the network. But how does it deal with bad actors and conflicts?
The entire idea of the chip process is based on it being orderly, transparent, and you can see it coming from a mile away, and you need to widely consult the ecosystem. So in doing all this, it leaves very little room for bad actors. So the process, some people complain that, it is slow. It imposes a lot of burden on me. I don't have time. My time is valuable. I don't want to go through this process. I have to ask a lot of people. That is a complete waste of energy. But it is precisely this slow-rolling, transparent, and time and energy consuming process that, as it goes on, it basically leaves very, very, very little room, I would say, for bad actors who, if they decide to go through this process, then whatever they're doing would either become good in the process, or it will be widely known that, this proposal is no good. So
And that comes back to the point I was making before, that a lot of the people that, at some point in the past may have been identified by some as bad actors, they really might not have been. There absolutely have been bad actors in the history of Bitcoin and Bitcoin Cash, but there's a lot of them who probably were not. And like Yunim said, they with a more structured process and the realization that this is significantly a social problem, a lot of those people would have just ended up, converging on really good solutions and good ideas and things that really do work well. People who have been in Bitcoin for a long time, they know that conflict arises, right? So it's quite a social process, really. It's easy to start to kind of dehumanize and demonize people who disagree with you when you're too late in the process. A big part of what this does is it surfaces all these issues and discussions much, much earlier. I mean, we're talking like a year ahead of time, right? Or 8, 9, 10 months ahead of time, as opposed to 1 month before the upgrade, literally. By doing that, you get in a position where actually a lot of the people that you might end up in some kind of, death struggle with, that leads to a split, everybody's actually pretty reasonable when you're much earlier in the process. Things can be discussed and things aren't set in stone yet. And it's been amazing to see the process where there's just so much more interaction. It's much more constructive and positive. Everybody knows that there's like this kind of competition for the best ideas, as opposed to, well, it's already been set in stone. So now it's whether I'm going to die on a hill and split. I think it's been amazing to see that it's actually working. Like it really is working and surfacing all these issues and reducing the amount of destructive conflict, right? Like it's more constructive criticism and constructive conflict. I love to see it.
It is important to remember that this is a voluntary system, and even the chip process itself is not etched in stone.
The chip process itself is also not something that is dictated or set in stone. It was proposed as a chip, following kind of its own terms. And it's actually upon all of us who are in this ecosystem to agree to follow those rules or not agree to follow those rules.
Imaginary Username also brought up the someone issue that I often see in the community.
This is something that Sheep Lightning has been saying a lot, even in other channels. And this is not just limited to the chip process. This extends to basically everything in Bitcoin Cash and beyond, which is that if you want something to happen, somebody has to drive that thing. You don't necessarily need to be a developer. You don't necessarily need to have a lot of money. You don't need to be especially eloquent or anything like that. But you need to first have a pretty good idea what you want. And second, this is the most important thing, you need to take ownership of that thing and drive it to success and completion. That is very important. A lot of people think that, I have this idea, I throw it out there, and then magically, poof, it happens. And yay, that is my idea. No, that's not how it happens. Ideas are a dime a dozen. But the ones that are driven to completion are the ones that matters.
John had some final thoughts for us.
If you want something to happen, If there's something important that you think needs to happen, there's on the chip process form, like there's a template for the chip, and there's a section there called owner, right? That's serious, right? If there's something that you think is very important, you're going to have to do it yourself. Find somebody to work with, find some other people who agree with you, and do it yourself. There's nobody to throw things at and expect them to do it for you. When there's good ideas, that there's absolutely no requirement that they come from or be driven by or be owned by a developer. At some point, developers are definitely necessary, right? Because it's just naturally a software system at the base of it. But yeah, this is a network process. So I'd like for everyone to be involved, and would love for people to take a look at chips and read the motivations and read the costs and the cost benefit analysis, and what stakeholders are interested. And maybe you realize, wait a minute, I'm a stakeholder in this. Actually, this is really important to me, or to my business, or to my idea, or to whatever it is that I'm working on. It would be fantastic to have more participation. So check out the chips. You can see those on bch.info/chips or on bitcoincashresearch.org.
I hope this video has cleared up a little of the confusion that surrounds the chip process. And I hope this video also inspires more people to get involved and check out the discussions that are going on about them. If you are so inclined, please check bitcoincashresearch.org. Thank you for watching.